The year is 1917. Without a doubt, all nations were at work to gain any advantage possible after 3 years of intense fighting. The lengthy Battle of Passchendaele had claimed many casualties. Unrestricted submarine warfare pushed the USA over the edge into a declaration of war, and the Russian Revolution was well underway and on track to the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, taking them out of the war for good. For the brave soldiers that fought in the meat grinder that was the Italian front, no breaks were offered, and the showdown at the Isonzo was about to reach its climax. Italy and Austria-Hungary had been clashing for well over 2 years, with the Italian army leaving a trail of Allied and Central bodies behind it as it painfully took territory moving into Slovenia. At the 11th Battle of the Isonzo, the brutality of the elevated warfare was catching up to the soldiers, and left them exhausted on both sides. Austria-Hungary's defense was out of energy and would not survive another offensive. Unfortunately, on the other side, the Italian army was reeling from the casualties they suffered from the previous battle. Both armies were in no shape to make any moves in this vulnerable time. This caused some concern in the German high command, who were worried about the imminent collapse of the Austro-Hungarian line. Austria-Hungary feared this as well, and Emperor Karl Franz Josef Ludwig Karl I asked General Erich Ludendorff of Germany for help. He was denied. Desperate, he went straight to the Kaiser for help, who ordered Ludendorff to spare about 7 divisions from various positions on the Eastern Front, which, despite the revolution, was still an area of battle as the Russians had not yet capitulated. With the newly formed 14th Army under the command of Otto von Bellow, Austria-Hungary had its sights on the vulnerable Italian line. After some extensive scouting, the target was the 32-kilometer salient in the area of Tolmino, near the village of Caporetto. The Caporetto sector was relatively quiet when the 2nd and 3rd armies were trying to lick their wounds, and it was home to a very important breach that allowed passage straight to the Friuli lowlands. This fact is very important, as it gave the side holding Caporetto a notable advantage, as the next area suitable for defense was the River Piave about 70 kilometers away. If Caporetto were to fall, the Italians would be in dire straits. Austria-Hungary had about 5 to 6 weeks to go from theory to practice before winter, so they wasted no time getting prepared. On the other side of the line, the Italian 2nd and 3rd armies were devastated. They had suffered about 158,000 casualties in the previous battle, and their surviving soldiers were just barely hanging on to their gains. If that wasn't enough, orders from the Italian brass were generic and confusing, air reconnaissance was limited due to German aircraft preventing flyovers, and their leadership was pretty stupid, to be honest. General Luigi Cadorna was very set in his ways, to say the least, and disregarded information and advice that was not his own, and severely underestimated the magnitude of the impending attack, which they had learned about through Austrian deserters. While the Italians were trying to pick themselves back up, the 14th Army snuck in right under their noses completely undetected. Fun fact about Cadorna: he had been on holiday near Venice for about 3 weeks before the battle and insisted that an offensive across the Isonzo should not be expected. He even brought the King of Italy to the top of Mount Stull, which overlooked the valley of Caporetto, and convinced him that nothing exceptional should be expected. His socialist and liberal critics planned to dismantle his authority when Italian parliament opened back up, so his attention was in the complete opposite direction of the defensive line. What great leadership. As for strategy, Austria-Hungary was planning a pincer attack to pinch the Italian salient and follow through into the Friuli lowlands. Italian communication codes had been cracked by Germans, giving them almost full knowledge of the Italian trench patterns across the front. For the 14th Army, the name of the game was surprise, and using Hutier tactics, which would be better known as stormtrooper tactics, was the strategy of choice. The bombardment at this battle consisted of high explosive shells from artillery guns and gas canisters from devices similar to Livens projectors. The artillery was going to work off of mathematical targeting instead of using sighting shots, and was used in incredibly focused heavy bombardments in order to completely decimate the Italian barbed wire and communication lines. The gas, on the other hand, was a chlorine arsenic agent that undermined the outdated masks currently in the pockets of the Italian soldiers, killing 500 to 600 of them and sending the rest fleeing into the defenses further back. Following the bombardments were the famous Sturmtruppen, who moved in small platoons to identify soft spots in the defensive line and pass through them to reach the back line and cause major disruption. Because of this, the threat of counterattack was greatly diminished and allowed for mortar and machine gun units to topple strong points and allow the regular troops to mop up everything else. Needless to say, the attack was a rousing success. The Italian defensive line crumpled and sent the 2nd and 3rd armies scrambling further and further into their own territories, while the 14th Army took prisoners by the thousands. I would recommend reading about Erwin Rommel's exploits with the Königlich Württembergisches Gebirgsbataillon, or Royal Württemberg Mountain Battalion, during the chase from Tolmino to the Piave. Although he was a very famous tank commander during World War II, he claimed that his greatest honors came from his exploits during this time. He remarks on how he and his men would rack up about 9,000 prisoners in only 2.5 days, losing only 6 of his own men. He even described an encounter on Monte Matajur, Hundreds of Italian soldiers stood atop Hill 1356, completely stunned by the efficiency of the attackers and looking down on Rommel's small detachment of only 4 companies. As he approached, Italian soldiers hoisted them up onto their shoulders and cheered on the mountain battalion. Rommel watched as an Italian commander and his staff wept off to the side. As their armies were on the run, the Italian high command fully focused on damage control. They scrambled for a new defensive strategy that the soldiers would listen to, and this battle was the last nail in the coffin for Cadorna's authority. Fellow General Luigi Capello, who had been ill and bedridden the entire time, based his orders on a counteroffensive which he hoped would come into fruition. This strategy, which directly opposed Cadorna's more defensive ideas, slowed the planning process down for about 8 days until they finally agreed upon a plan of action. First, the Italian soldiers defended on the river Tagliamento. When that failed, they retreated to the river Levenza. Finally, the attackers pushed them back to the river Piave, where the 14th Army, having extended much farther than they expected and much too quickly, stretched their supply lines much too thin and could not support the continuation of the advance. At the same time, Italy got much needed support from its allies. 6 French divisions and 5 British divisions had been sent to aid the shattered Italian army and filled its ranks with rested soldiers and fresh equipment. The losses suffered at the hands of the 14th Army were devastating. The Central Powers suffered about 70,000 casualties. On the other hand, Italy had suffered about 658,000 casualties, 265,000 of which were taken prisoner. They had also lost just under 7,000 artillery pieces, mortars, and machine guns. All in all, this accounted for over a quarter of the entire Italian army, gone in just the course of a month. Cadorna's military reputation was effectively destroyed, partly due to his performance handling the situation and partly because of a new prime minister, Vittorio Orlando, who was instituted and renewed Italy's war effort after the previous one lost a vote of no confidence. Fingers were pointed, an entire military investigation would be opened up in 1919, and the word Caporetto would become synonymous with an absolute defeat. About 645,000 casualties were suffered by the Italians to bring the front to where it was before Caporetto, and they suffered more than that, losing it all over the course of just 1 month. Even a century after the end of the Great War, nobody can forget the defeat at Caporetto. Thank you for watching my video. If you want me to talk about other historical things, leave a comment and we'll see what happens. Be sure to subscribe to see my new videos and learn cool stuff.
We down in his trench, the private dreamed of sailing on the sea, riding the wave.